Today, I want to talk about grief. Grief needs a witness. I've been thinking about it lately and why some grief seems to move through us eventually, while other grief can remain frozen inside us for years. I think sometimes grief gets stuck because it was never witnessed. I've heard this in so many podcasts now that grief unwitnessed is unprocessed. There is an experience of grief that shattered something in me years ago, not only the loss itself, but the dreams attached to it, the future I thought I was walking towards, the person I thought I would become, the life I was certain I was going to have. And I don't think I ever truly let anyone see the full magnitude of how that affected me. I've talked about pieces of it, I've intellectualized it, spiritualized it, tried to find the lesson, tried to become stronger and wiser and more resilient because of it. But there's a difference between explaining your grief and having someone actually witness it and stick by you. And I find it astonishing that nobody really prepares us for this. We spend years in school learning things we supposedly need in order to navigate life, but nobody teaches us what to do when life knocks us to our knees, what to do when we're bawling our eyes out, screaming our lungs out as our guts convulse in knots, staring at a future that suddenly doesn't exist anymore. Nobody teaches us how to sit beside someone else when that happens to them either. Across cultures and throughout history, people have created mourning rituals, ceremonies, songs, gatherings, periods set aside specifically for grieving, and communities in which elders and others who have survived loss could help hold those who were entering it. These traditions vary between cultures, but I find the underlying idea beautiful, that grief was given somewhere to go. It's supposed to have somewhere to go. We're supposed to have community. Cultures have created ways of gathering around the bereaved, including traditions like Jewish Shiva, where community physically comes towards someone in mourning rather than expecting them to disappear somewhere and return again when they're okay. Part of what so many of us are suffering from isn't only grief, we're also suffering from the loss of the container for grief. Somewhere along the way, many of us have inherited this idea that grief is something we're supposed to process privately. You might get a funeral, you might get flowers, people might check on you for a few weeks, and then the world starts moving again. But your world might not have started moving again. Human beings were never designed to metabolize our greatest losses entirely alone. We need community. We need people who are older, wiser, who have survived devastating loss before us to say, I recognize this place. I know it feels impossible. Sit here for a while. We need people around us who aren't frightened by our crying, people who don't need us to stop, people who aren't measuring how long it's been and quietly wondering why we're still talking about it. There's ancient wisdom in creating rituals around grief because they gave the unbearable somewhere to go. It gives grief a time, a place, a witness, a community. One of the great wounds of modern life is that we've individualized experiences that were once held collectively. We are only as strong as our weakest link. We say go to therapy, and therapy can be great, it can be life-changing. But one person being paid to witness you for 50 minutes a week cannot really replace belonging. Therapy left me feeling more hopeless, though I wouldn't give it up entirely. It cannot replace the friend who answers the phone when it's not convenient, the person who brings food without asking what you need, the person who remembers the anniversary, the person who can tolerate hearing the same story for the 15th time because something inside of you is still trying to understand how something that mattered so much could be gone. There's another kind of grief, The grief that doesn't come with a funeral. There are losses the world immediately understands, and then there are losses where you're expected to just keep functioning. The special connection that faded slowly while the person is still alive. The future you were certain you were going to have. The family you thought you would create. The friendship you thought would last your entire life. The health you assumed that your body would always give you. The version of yourself who existed before something significant happened. The years you thought would look completely different than they did. Where is the ceremony for those things? Where do we put the flowers? Who gathers around us and says, I understand, I'm here. A piece of me died too. Sometimes what you're grieving isn't only a person. You're grieving an entire unlived life or a previous version of yourself. And perhaps that's one reason certain losses become so lonely. You start hearing the word still. You're still upset about that. You still think about them. You haven't moved on yet. And eventually you begin saying that to yourself. Why am I still grieving this? I've asked myself that question so many times. 7 years can begin to feel less like a measurement of time and more like an accusation. Like, surely if I were healthier, wiser, more spiritual, more evolved, I would have figured out how to put this down by now. But maybe instead of asking, why haven't I gotten over this, I could ask, what did this grief never receive? Was it allowed to be spoken? Was it believed? Was somebody willing to hear the whole ugly, embarrassing, repetitive story without trying to rush me toward its meaning? Did anyone understand that I wasn't only grieving what happened, I was grieving everything I thought was going to happen? I was grieving the version of me that I was prior to the loss, who could still dance with more joy. There's a reason grieving people sometimes tell the same story over and over again. We can become impatient with repetition, even with ourselves. Why am I thinking about this again? Why am I telling this story again? But repetition may be the mind trying to make meaning out of something it still cannot reconcile. Something happened that exponentially contradicted the reality we thought we were living in. And the mind keeps walking back through the wreckage asking, how the hell did I get here? Sometimes the story needs to be told more than once because every telling reaches another layer. And grief isn't only a story we carry in our minds either. It can live in the body, in the heaviness in your chest, the lump in your throat, the panic attacks at night, the stabbing, chronic pain in your back that keeps being re-injured, the exhaustion that seems disproportionate to what you did that day, the song that comes on years later and suddenly your body reacts before your mind even caught up, crying in the car, a smell, a season, a particular street, hearing someone's name in the grocery aisle. An ordinary Tuesday when something you thought you had processed suddenly feels like it happened yesterday. The body can remember what the mouth never got to say. A witness gives some of that grief permission to finally become expression instead of something we're constantly containing. There's such a profound difference between witnessing someone and rescuing them. We often try to rescue because watching someone we love hurt makes us so uncomfortable. So we give advice, we diagnose, we compare their experiences to something that happened to us. We look for the silver lining. We say, everything happens for a reason. You're going to be okay. God has a plan. Time heals all things. Or sometimes we avoid contact with them entirely. I definitely have felt what it's like when everyone leaves. Grief doesn't need wisdom yet. It needs a safe witness who has the capacity to sit beside something they cannot fix, not immediately turning pain into positivity, not pretending the loss was secretly a gift that leads to something better, just allowing something unbearable to become a little more bearable because for a moment it is being carried by two nervous systems instead of just one. Sometimes that looks like physically holding someone's hand. Sometimes it's sitting silently beside them while they cry. Sometimes it's simply being the comforting voice on the other end of the phone when they say, "I'm not okay right now, and I don't want to be alone with my thoughts." And maybe one of the most loving questions we can ask in that moment is incredibly simple. Do you want me to help you think through this, or do you want me to just be here? I've learned how incredibly rare and precious it is to have someone that you feel safe enough to call in that moment. Someone you don't have to entertain, someone you don't have to impress, someone you don't have to convince that your grief is reasonable, someone who isn't secretly waiting for you to hurry up and become easier to be around. And there is another loss that can happen inside of grief that I don't think is talked about enough either. Sometimes you lose the witnesses too. The people who knew the original story. The people who once said, "Call me anytime, I'll always be here for you." The people you thought would continue to be there eventually drift away, and suddenly you're grieving the original loss while also grieving the people who helped you survive it. Sometimes years later, part of the loneliness isn't even only missing what happened, it's realizing that fewer and fewer people remember who you were before it happened. There can be something devastating about losing the people who once held pieces of your history. I know what it feels like to wish somebody would just stay on the phone a little longer. I know what it feels like to desperately not want to be alone inside your own mind. I want to be someone people don't have to perform wellness around. I want to be a safe shoulder to cry on. I want the people I love to know that they can call me before they've learned how to explain what they're feeling. That they don't have to turn their pain into an inspirational story before I can tolerate hearing it. Witnessing is one of the purest forms of love we can offer each other. To simply sit down beside them in the rubble and say, "I know, I see it, I'm here." Perhaps we can become better witnesses. Perhaps we can regularly ask the ones closest to us, "Hey, is there something on your heart today that you don't want to carry alone? Are there any words your heart wishes it could hear right now?" The next time somebody we love is falling apart, maybe we can just let them tell the story again. Maybe we can remember that grief doesn't become irrelevant simply because time has passed. Maybe we can call the friend who disappeared for a while instead of automatically assuming that they want to be left alone. Perhaps healing isn't always about finally finding the right way to get over something. Perhaps some of the things we've been carrying for years are still waiting for the experience that they needed when they first happened. To finally be seen, to finally be held with tenderness, to finally grieve without being seen as low vibrational negative energy. And if you have grief like that, grief that you've hidden because it feels too big, too old, too embarrassing, too negative, or because you think everyone must be tired of hearing about it, I hope you find someone safe enough to witness it. I hope we can become those people for each other. I can't go backwards and give myself the community I needed years ago, but I can allow the absence to teach me something about love, that I can become someone who isn't frightened by another person's darkness. All of you is welcome here. Thank you for watching. Please share and subscribe. Bless you.